Hi, I'm Edward, and welcome to Marxists at the Movies. I'm proud to introduce this project, created with the help of my AI team. You won't be hearing my voice just yet. Instead, two AI hosts will guide you through the stories, struggles, and revolutionary sparks hidden in the films we know and love. Thanks for being here, and enjoy the show.
This is the Marxists at the Movies podcast.
Scene opens, white lights dim down low. The cinema whispers where truths can grow. From shadows deep and screens ignite, the proletariat comes alive tonight. Tonight, Marxists at the movies, bright and raw, breaking through the reels to rewrite the law. Workers of the world in every frame, changing the credits, rewriting the name.
Welcome, comrades, to Marxists at the Movies.
Great to be back.
So, just a heads up before we really dive in today.
Yeah.
We are going to be talking all about the film Norma Rae. Spoilers ahead if you haven't seen it yet and you plan to.
Definitely spoiler territory. Today, we're really digging deep into Norma Rae, the 1979 film, specifically through a Marxist lens.
Right. And our main guide here is going to be an article called Norma Rae, 1979, Union on the Line.
That's the core text, yeah. But we're also pulling in some other perspectives to, flesh things out. We've got Henry Giroux's review from Jump Cut,
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Amy Loisel's book Beyond Norma Rae, plus a review of that book, and also a piece from The Leveler called Films for Leftists.
So, a good range of sources. And the idea isn't just to, summarize the plot, is it?
No, definitely not. We really want to unpack how this film shows class struggle, labor, exploitation.
And how it maybe helps us understand or maybe limits our understanding of working class consciousness, how people become aware of their situation.
Exactly. So setting the scene, 1979, what's going on then?
Well, as the Union on the Line article points out, it's kind of the tail end of the stagflation era, right?
Yeah.
Economic gloom.
Right. Slow growth, high inflation. And we're right on the brink of the whole Reaganomics shift.
Yeah, the political tide was turning. But the article says something like, the working class still had a fist left to raise.
Yeah, it captures that moment, I think. There was still this sense of potential for organized resistance, even with the economic pressure.
And the film just throws you into that world. That article mentions how class isn't just talked about. It's like you feel it in every frame.
Oh, totally. It's visceral. Think about those opening scenes with Norma Rae.
Yeah.
She doesn't just work in the factory. She lives it. It's in her lungs. It shapes her relationships. It's this inherited poverty.
The walk to work. It's not like she's skipping off to a fulfilling career.
Not at all. It's pure resignation. The job just permeates her entire existence.
And the Union on the Line piece brings up Marxist alienation here. How does that play out for her?
Well, alienation in this sense is about being separated from your own labor, from the product, from your own potential, really, for Norma Rae.
Right.
I mean, her body is just labor power.
Right.
Her time belongs to the factory. Her identity, at least initially, seems completely defined by her value to the factory owners.
By wages.
Barely enough to survive, right? Just enough to keep her coming back, keep generating profit for capital, not really enough to build a different kind of life.
And the fact that it's set in the American South, that adds another layer, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The film really portrays it, like the article says, as a kind of labor colony.
What does that mean exactly?
It means unions are seen as this foreign hostile force. The bosses, the mill owners, they're deeply woven into the fabric of the community church, local politics, everything.
So trying to organize isn't just an economic fight, it's like a social betrayal.
Exactly. You're disrupting the whole established order, this deep-seated economic dependence. It's really personal.
Then Reuben Warshawski arrives, the organizer from New York, Jewish guy. The article calls him the outsider agitator trope.
Yeah, and that could be a problem, but the film, I think, mostly avoids the worst parts of that.
How so?
Well, it doesn't really fall into that false savior trap. Rubin brings knowledge, resources, strategy.
The tools, like you said.
Right. But Norma is the one who takes the lead. She connects with the workers. She has the credibility. She's the one who ultimately drives it. He facilitates maybe, but she leads.
Those scenes between them, like in the motel lobby or getting coffee, they feel crucial.
They really are, because you see how Norma gets convinced. It's not Rubin's, fancy ideology.
No,
it's her practical questions. What's the union actually going to do for me? For us? And ultimately, it's seeing the injustice firsthand, the stuff she already knew but maybe hadn't fully articulated. That's what pushes her.
Which ties into that Marxist idea, right? That class consciousness, it bubbles up from lived experience, not just someone telling you about theory.
Precisely. Rubin brings resources, sure, and a different perspective. But Norma brings the lived reality of exploitation, the trust of her coworkers. They see themselves in her struggle.
Okay, let's talk about that scene, the union sign. Standing on the table. Iconic.
So iconic. And the Union on the Line article calls it her class awakening.
What makes it so powerful? It's not like she gives a big speech.
No, and that's key. She's just been through this humiliating interrogation by the bosses, right? They're trying to break her down.
Yeah.
So her standing up there, silently holding that sign, it's pure defiance. It's visceral. It's her reclaiming her dignity right after they tried to strip it away.
And the factory goes quiet.
That revolutionary silence, as the article puts it. It's like in that moment, she transforms. She's no longer just this alienated object of labor. She becomes the class subject, someone aware of her own power, their collective power.
And the boss's reaction is pretty predictable.
Oh, textbook capitalist tactics. Isolate the organizer. Threaten them. Fire them. Make an example.
Try to scare everyone else back into line.
Exactly. But the thing is, as the article points out, once that spark of consciousness is lit, it's really, really hard to put out completely.
And the film is obviously centered on class, but gender plays a big role too, doesn't it? Norma's a woman in this tough, male-dominated environment.
Absolutely. You can't really separate them. The article touches on this, and you see it throughout the film.
Like how?
Well, the way her sexual history is used to shame her, for example, or how some of the men seem to doubt her courage until, her actions actually benefit them.
Right. And the boss calling her out for distractions with men.
Yeah, while the male workers probably aren't getting scrutinized in the same way, it's that intersectionality.
And the Union on the Line piece links this to Marxist feminism. How does that lens help here?
Marxist feminism really emphasizes how, under capitalism, the economic exploitation of labor and the social control, particularly of women's bodies and lives, are tangled up together.
So Norma's fighting the bosses and the patriarchy?
In a way, yeah. She's fighting the system that profits from her work, but also the system that expects women to just suffer quietly, to conform to certain roles, both on and off the factory floor. Her fight for the union is also a fight for her own autonomy as a woman.
And the ending. It's not this triumphant Hollywood victory, is it? The vote is still pending.
No, it's deliberately ambiguous. Norma's fired, she's exhausted, but she's also changed. Fundamentally changed. She has this new awareness.
That final scene with Rubin.
Yeah, it emphasizes that the struggle continues. It's not resolved. It's got that dialectical momentum the article mentions. The contradictions are out in the open. The fight's just begun.
Okay, so that's a good look through the lens of that main article. But Henry Giroux, in his review, he brings in some different, maybe more critical points about Hollywood itself, right?
Yeah, Giroux's perspective is really interesting. He talks about how Hollywood generally tends to depoliticize class, flattens it out.
How so? What does he mean?
Well, he argues that Hollywood often reduces class struggle to these sort of predictable formulas or just individual problems. Instead of collective struggle, you get stories about, individual social mobility.
Like Saturday Night Fever, maybe. Dancing your way out.
Exactly. Or working class characters are portrayed as, neurotic, like in Taxi Driver, or it's all about masculine pride, sometimes tied up with racism or sexism, like in Rocky or The Deer Hunter.
So avoiding the systemic issues.
Pretty much. Giroux sees Hollywood as part of what Althusser or Gramsci would call an ideological state apparatus. It helps reproduce the dominant culture, reinforces the status quo.
By framing things individualistically.
Yeah, framing freedom as purely individual, turning social problems into personal failings. And he says it's not necessarily some conscious conspiracy,
right,
but more like a worldview baked into the system, into the structures of production, a kind of self-delusion, he calls it.
But he sees Norma Rae as different, as maybe breaking that mold somewhat.
He does. He thinks that maybe despite intentions, the film actually captures the real nature of the problem better than many others. It does focus on working class struggle.
With unionizing and feminism as part of that.
Right, as subordinate but integrated themes, which is crucial. He really highlights the relationship between Norma and Reuben.
How does that relationship illustrate his points?
He uses it to show the differences in class experience, how their backgrounds shape their realities, their ways of seeing the world. He talks about cultural capital.
Okay, what that?
It's basically the different sets of values, ways of speaking, knowledge, practices that people have based on their class background in everyday life. Dominant classes tend to see their cultural capital as legitimate, universal.
And devalue the cultural capital of the working class.
Exactly. And you see this difference between Reuben and Norma. Think about their contrasting stories about losing their virginity, for instance, or Reuben's more abstract language versus Norma's very grounded, practical concerns.
So there's this gap between the intellectual organizer and the working class woman.
Initially, yes. Giroux points out this sort of division of labor. But crucially, they learned from each other. They bridged that gap to some extent.
He connects this to Gramsci, doesn't he? Something about knowing versus understanding.
Yeah, the idea that the popular element knows but does not always understand, does not always feel. The film, for Giroux, shows a potential bridging of that, bringing feeling and understanding together through struggle.
And he praises the fact that their relationship isn't sexualized.
Yes. He sees that as a really progressive departure from typical Hollywood stuff. It allows the focus to remain on the class and political dimensions of their interaction.
What about the other working class characters? Does he think they're well portrayed?
He thinks they're shown realistically, with strengths and weaknesses tied to their daily grind, like Norma's father or the other mill workers.
He mentions that house meeting scene.
Right, where workers voice these real, everyday concerns about pay, conditions, dignity, not just spouting abstract political slogans. It shows their reality.
And the union sign scene. How does Giroux see that?
As this incredibly powerful visual metaphor for the source of labor power, the workers' implicit strength finally being asserted.
Does he have criticisms, though?
Oh, sure. He notes things like maybe underdeveloped themes or blurred divisions within the working class itself. But he suggests that these silences, in a way, allow for a sharper focus on the core class struggle.
And he emphasizes that Norma's feminism develops out of her class struggle.
Exactly. It's linked, subordinate. That causality, he argues, is often missing in other films that might tackle similar themes.
He also praises the dialogue, right? The authenticity.
Yeah, the script, the language feels real, and the whole visual and auditory texture of the film capturing that mill environment. So for Giroux, despite limitations, it's a valuable film for understanding class politics in everyday life.
Okay, so Norma Rae, the film focuses intensely on this one woman's journey, her awakening. But Émile Loisel's book, Beyond Norma Rae, seems to want to complicate that narrative, right? Put it in a broader context.
That's exactly right. Loisel's work is fascinating because she looks at both Crystal Lee Sutton, the real woman who inspired Norma Rae, and another activist, Gloria Maldonado, a Puerto Rican garment worker.
Okay, why bring Maldonado into it?
Because both women, in the 1970s, were involved in union activism, partly seeking meaning beyond traditional gender roles, but their stories got told and remembered very differently.
How so?
Well, Sutton's story became Norma Rae, this massive Hollywood hit. Maldonado, meanwhile, was involved in a more scholarly public history project called Nosotros Trabajamos.
We work.
Right. And Loisel argues this difference highlights the arena of cultural politics, this space where people with unequal resources, unequal cultural capital struggle to shape public understanding of the working class.
So race, access to media production. That all plays a huge role in whose story gets amplified.
Absolutely. And Loisel argues that the icon of Norma Rae, Sally Field holding the sign, actually became associated with a kind of neoliberal individualism.
It seems like a moment of collective action almost.
Well, it gets framed as this singular act of defiance by one heroic individual, separate from the messy collective work of organizing. And this image circulated at the same time as, texts promoting libertarian economics and right-wing politics were gaining ground.
So popular culture isn't just reflecting economic relations, it's actively shaping them.
That's Loisel's argument. She tries to connect political economy and culture by looking at how these women's lives were represented, focusing on that cultural politics arena where power is really asymmetrical.
And the book cover itself apparently reflects this.
Yeah, the review mentions a split image, the Norma Rae icon on one side, and this obscured collective of diverse workers on the other, highlighting that tension.
Loisel contrasts Nosotros Trabajamos with Norma Rae then.
Yeah, she sees Nosotras as a more accurate, collaborative effort compared to what she calls the hyper-individualism of Norma Rae. She argues the film had these silences.
Silences. About what?
About the broader collective drive, about the complexities of the union campaign. And she feels it sometimes fell back on gender stereotypes, even while focusing on a strong woman. The review also notes Loisel's point that women workers were actively challenging gender tropes that favored white masculinity.
But the review of Loisel's book, by Castillo, raises some criticisms too, doesn't it? About missing context.
It does. Castillo suggests Loisel might have a somewhat narrow interpretation and misses a really key cultural context. The vibrant labor and social history movement of the 60s and 70s, the whole history from below movement.
What kind of stuff was part of that?
Well, Castillo mentions books by historians like Jeremy Britcher or Sidney Lenz, Studs Terkel's oral histories like Working, documentary films like With Babies and Banners about the Flint sit-down strike, or The Life and Times of Rosie the Riveter. Howard Zinn's A People's History comes out of this era too. There was a lot going on culturally around working class history.
And Maldonado was apparently connected to this wider scene.
Yeah, Castillo points out a missed connection to Maldonado's involvement with a Smithsonian exhibit called Working Americans back in 1975.
So Norma Rae wasn't the only film dealing with working class themes in the 70s.
Not by a long shot. Castillo lists several others, Rocky, obviously, but also documentaries like Harlan County, USA, dramas like FIST and Blue Collar, even comedies like 9 to 5.
9 to 5. That actually had some pretty sharp social commentary, didn't it?
Yeah, about childcare, flexible schedules, stuff that's still relevant. So there was a much richer, more diverse landscape of working class representation than just focusing on Norma Rae might suggest.
Later films would tackle race and class more directly, too.
Right. Films like The Killing Floor or John Sayles' Mate Juan, which Castillo mentions, they really dig into those intersections of community, class, and race in labor history.
It sounds like this debate about how to represent the working class, its struggles, its diversity, it's ongoing. Castillo mentions the Amazon union drive.
Yeah, the review concludes by noting how the struggle to define the working class and its political engagement continues, often playing out theatrically in the media, mirroring this kind of neoliberal political economy. The Amazon drive is just one recent example of these dynamics repeating.
Okay, so bringing in that last source, the Leveler's article, Films for Leftists, it sounds like it's looking for more explicitly positive examples.
Yeah, that piece is trying to highlight films that show positive, real-world examples of labor victories, or at least struggles, alongside fictional films that depict the horrors of capitalism.
And it makes the point that all films have politics, right?
Absolutely. They reflect worldviews, they create narratives that shape how we see things. They're political documents, as Kino Lefter puts it.
And Norma Rae fits into their category of films showing class struggle.
Definitely. It's a historical fiction or semi-biographical take on a real union drive.
The article contrasts it with Mate One, which is set much earlier.
Right. Mate One depicts a 1920 coal miners' strike in West Virginia. It really shows the staples of that earlier era of union busting.
Like what?
Company towns, where the mining company owns everything, housing, stores, paying workers in scrip only usable at the company store, docking wages, using a transient, often immigrant workforce to keep people divided.
And the violence.
Intense violence. The company hiring Pinkertons or other detective agencies to infiltrate the union, beat up organizers, attack strikers. Mate One shows that brutal reality.
And the Leveler's piece argues this history is still relevant.
Very much so. They make the point that this long history of unions fighting capitalist power, fighting extreme exploitation, and building working class solidarity, it's not just history. You look at Amazon or Elon Musk talking about building essentially new company towns.
The same dynamics keep reappearing, just maybe in slightly different form.
Exactly. The fundamental conflict over labor, power, and dignity persists.
Okay, so pulling this all together, Norma Rae clearly stands out as this powerful, if maybe a bit Hollywoodized portrayal of that initial spark, right? The alienation, the struggle, the awakening of consciousness.
Yeah, it really captures that journey incredibly well through Norma Rae's character. Sally Field's performance is just unforgettable.
But as Loisel and Giroux and Castillo point out, we have to be careful not to just see it as this individual hero story.
Right. While it's celebrated for her defiance, we need to remember the context, the collective action that's often obscured, and the ongoing cultural and political battles over how the working class gets represented. Is it about individual grit or collective power?
The film captures a specific moment, 1979, but the core themes, exploitation, the fight for dignity, the need for solidarity, they don't really go away, do they?
Not at all. They remain incredibly relevant.
So, maybe a final thought for listeners. Think about how labor and class are portrayed in media today. Does it tend to reinforce those individualistic narratives that Loisel critiques? Or does it manage to show collective power, solidarity?
Yeah, and think about that Norma Rae moment, the iconic image. Does it truly empower workers by showing defiance? Or could it, maybe unintentionally, serve a kind of neoliberal focus on individual success against the odds, potentially hiding the fact that real lasting change almost always requires collective organized action?
It's a crucial question. How is struggle represented, and whose interests does that representation serve?
Definitely something to chew on.
Okay, judgment time. The hammer and sickle rating. For its compelling depiction of the early stages of class struggle and that spark of collective consciousness, even with, the Hollywood sheen and the critiques we've discussed, we're giving Norma Rae a solid hammer and sickle rating of 4.5 out of 5.
I think that's fair. It acknowledges its power and its significance while recognizing it's not the whole story, representation-wise, a really important film, warts and all.
Agreed. This has been Marxists at the Movies.
Scene opens, white lights dim down low.
Thank you for listening to the Marxists at the Movies podcast. Don't forget to like and comment.
From shadows deep and screens ignite, the proletariat comes alive tonight. Tonight, Marxists at the movies, bright and raw, breaking through the reels to rewrite the law. Workers of the world in every frame, changing the credits, rewriting the name. Popcorn power and the working class dream, each flickers with a revolutionary beam. The heroes rise from the factory floor, challenging the scripts and demanding more. Behind the velvet curtains lies the fight, directors of destiny taking the light. The dialogue chimes with justice in stride, the proletariat walks where stars collide. Marxists at the movies, bright and raw, breaking through the reels to rewrite the law. Workers of the world in every frame, changing the credits, rewriting the name. Blockbusters topple in an epic embrace.